November 16, 1957, a hardware store in Plainfield, Wisconsin failed to open its doors. Most people in the small town assumed it was an innocent mistake, a sick day, or a family emergency. However, that couldn't have been further from the truth. By nightfall, police officers would step inside a farmhouse on the outskirts of town and discover something that would change American crime history forever. A collection of masks, clothing, and household items meticulously crafted from human skin. The store belonged to Bernice Worden, a 58-year-old widow who had run the business for years. When her son Frank, a deputy sheriff, arrived to check on her, he found the front door unlocked, the register missing, and a trail of blood leading out the back exit. On the counter sat a sales receipt for a half-gallon of antifreeze. The customer's name was written in Bernice's handwriting, Ed Gein. Frank knew Ed. Everyone in Plainfield knew Ed. He was the quiet, awkward farmer who lived alone on an isolated property. He was odd, sure, but harmless. He helped neighbors with odd jobs, babysat children, and never caused trouble. But Frank also remembered something unsettling. Ed had visited the store the day before and specifically asked if Bernice would be working alone on Saturday. When officers arrived at the Gein farmhouse that evening, they found Ed at a neighbor's house, calm and cooperative. They asked if they could search his property. Ed agreed. What they discovered in the next few hours would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Inside the darkened shed behind the main house, Deputy Sheriff Dan Chase shined his flashlight upward and froze. Hanging from the rafters by her ankles was the headless, gutted body of Bernice Worden. Her torso had been split open from sternum to pelvis, dressed like a deer carcass. Her head had been severed and placed in a burlap sack nearby, a bullet wound visible in the skull. But this was just the beginning. As investigators moved into the main house, they were overwhelmed by the stench of decay and filth. The interior was a labyrinth of garbage, rotting food, and newspaper stacks. And scattered throughout the rooms, hidden among the clutter, were objects that defied comprehension. 4 chairs with seats upholstered in human skin, a wastebasket made from flesh, bowls carved from human skulls, a shoebox containing 9 preserved vulvas, leggings stitched together from real human leg skin, a belt fashioned from female nipples, lampshades stretched over frames with recognizable facial features, and most disturbing of all, a full-body suit, meticulously stitched together from the torsos and breasts of multiple women, complete with a mask made from a woman's face. Officers found the face of Mary Hogan, a tavern owner who had vanished 3 years earlier in 1954, preserved in a paper bag. They found her skull in a box. They realized with growing horror that Ed hadn't just killed 2 women. He had been robbing graves for years, exhuming the recently deceased to harvest their remains for his grotesque projects. When questioned, Ed confessed calmly. He admitted to killing Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden. He admitted to digging up at least 9 graves between 1947 and 1952. He explained, in a detached monotone, that he had been trying to create a woman's suit so he could crawl inside it and become his mother. For those who don't know, Ed Gein grew up in one of the most psychologically damaging environments imaginable. His mother, Augusta, was a fiercely religious woman who believed all women except herself were sinful and corrupt. She isolated Ed and his brother Henry on a remote farm, forbidding them from making friends or speaking to girls. She preached to them daily about the evils of lust, alcohol, and the outside world. Ed worshipped her. When Augusta died of a stroke in 1945, Ed was 39 years old and utterly alone. He sealed off the rooms his mother had used, preserving them exactly as she had left them. He let the rest of the house fall into squalor, and sometime around 1947, he began visiting the local cemeteries at night. He later claimed he entered dissociative states, waking up in the graveyard with a shovel in his hand and no memory of how he got there. Psychologists would later diagnose him with severe attachment disorder, possible schizophrenia, and an obsessive fixation on his deceased mother. Ed wanted to become her. He wanted to wear her. And when grave robbing wasn't enough, he turned to murder. Mary Hogan looked like Augusta. So did Bernice Worden, middle-aged, sturdy, independent women who ran their own businesses. Ed didn't see them as people, he saw them as raw materials. But here's the thing, Ed lived in the same town for decades. He interacted with people daily, he babysat children, he attended church. And no one noticed. How is that possible? How could a man create a house of horrors in plain sight and no one thought to check? Ed Gein was arrested on November 16, 1957, and charged with first-degree murder. During his initial interrogation, a police officer assaulted him in a fit of rage, rendering his first confession inadmissible in court. But the physical evidence was overwhelming. Ed's own words, combined with the grotesque inventory found in his home, left no doubt. In 1968, after being held in a psychiatric hospital for a decade, Ed was deemed competent to stand trial. He was found guilty, but immediately judged not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, and later transferred to Mendota Mental Health Institute, where he would remain for the rest of his life. Ed Gein never expressed remorse. He rarely spoke about his crimes. He read books, did light maintenance work, and lived quietly until his death from respiratory failure on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77. He was buried in Plainfield Cemetery next to his mother. His grave marker was stolen multiple times by souvenir hunters and eventually removed entirely. The Gein farmhouse burned to the ground in March 1958, under suspicious circumstances. Many believe it was arson committed by townspeople who wanted to erase the horror from their community. Today, nothing remains of the property. This case has resurfaced in public consciousness multiple times over the decades, and in late 2025, it's happening again. A new streaming series dramatized Ed's life, reigniting debates about accuracy, exploitation, and the ethics of true crime entertainment. Search interest in Ed Gein spiked as viewers returned to the original case files, trying to separate fact from fiction. And here's what the facts tell us. Ed Gein was not a serial killer in the traditional sense. He confessed to 2 murders, but his psychological profile, his methods, and his grotesque artistry inspired 3 of the most iconic horror villains in cinema history. Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. These characters live on in popular culture, but they're fictionalized, exaggerated versions of the truth. The real Ed Gein was quieter, stranger, and far more pathetic than any movie monster. He was a lonely, broken man who never escaped his mother's shadow, even after her death. In a boarded-up farmhouse in rural Wisconsin, grief, isolation, and obsession fused into one of the most disturbing crime scenes in American history. Ed Gein didn't just kill 2 women. He built a world from the dead, a twisted shrine to a mother who had destroyed him long before he ever picked up a shovel. The question we're left with isn't just what Ed Gein did, it's how an entire community missed the warning signs. How a man could live among neighbors, friends, and families for years, hiding unimaginable horrors behind a polite smile and a quiet demeanor. It's a reminder that the most terrifying monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes, they look like the guy next door, and unless someone with new insight decides to come forward, will never fully understand what drove Ed Gein to do what he did. After nearly 70 years, that truth remains locked inside a mind that no longer exists.